Narrator. The phone call arrived on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. The kind of afternoon that should have been completely forgettable, with soft rain tapping against the windows of Taylor Kennedy's small London apartment, while she sat at her desk surrounded by skincare samples, notebooks, and product sketches for the beauty brand she had spent years dreaming about building. At 21 years old, Taylor was finally beginning to see her hard work pay off. After studying entrepreneurship and cosmetic formulation, she had dedicated herself to creating skincare products that made women feel beautiful and confident. Her future seemed bright, her ambitions endless, and her excitement contagious. Then her phone rang. She almost ignored it. It was a decision she would spend months wishing she had never made. The moment she answered, her entire world shattered. The voice on the other end spoke carefully, as though every word carried a weight too heavy for ordinary conversation. There had been an accident, a terrible accident, and her sister wasn't coming home. Taylor remembered rushing to the hospital, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold her phone, her heartbeat pounding so hard against her chest that she thought she might collapse before she arrived. The entire journey felt unreal, as though she had somehow wandered into someone else's nightmare and would wake up at any moment. But she never woke up, because when she arrived, the truth was waiting for her. Rose Kennedy was gone, 25 years old, gone forever. The words refused to make sense. How could someone who had spoken to her that very morning suddenly no longer exist? How could someone who had promised to meet her for dinner next weekend simply disappear from the world? How could her sister, her best friend, her entire family be reduced to memories in a matter of seconds? The answer was simple. Life wasn't fair, and grief didn't care whether you were prepared for it. Rose had never just been Taylor's older sister. She had been everything. When their parents died years earlier in Nigeria, Rose had been only 15 years old while Taylor was 10. Their aunt had immediately brought them to London, promising them safety, stability, and opportunities that would be difficult to find back home. Their aunt had done her best to care for them, but it was Rose who truly stepped into the role of parent. Rose attended school meetings. Rose helped with homework. Rose comforted Taylor through heartbreaks and disappointments. Rose celebrated every achievement, no matter how small. Rose stayed awake on nights when Taylor couldn't sleep. Rose remembered birthdays, important exams, forgotten lunches, and every tiny detail that mattered. More than that, they had become inseparable. Some sisters loved each other. Taylor and Rose needed each other. There wasn't a single day they went without talking, not one. Even after Rose became a doctor and her schedule became impossibly demanding, she always found time for Taylor. A 5-minute call, a voice note, a text message. Something, anything. They shared everything. Relationships, friendships, dreams, failures, embarrassing moments, funny stories. Nothing remained hidden between them. Rose wasn't simply Taylor's sister, she was her safest place. And suddenly, that safe place was gone. The months that followed became the darkest period of Taylor's life. She stopped caring about everything. The skincare business she had poured her heart into was abandoned almost overnight. Orders remained unanswered. Meetings were canceled. New product launches disappeared from her calendar. Employees waited patiently for weeks before eventually finding other jobs elsewhere because their boss had completely vanished from the world. Taylor barely noticed. Most days she stayed in bed. The curtains remained closed. The lights remained off. Food lost its taste. Music became noise. Television became meaningless. The world continued moving while she remained trapped in the exact moment she had learned that Rose was dead. Friends called endlessly. She ignored them. They knocked on her door. She pretended she wasn't home. Her aunt begged her to come downstairs and eat. Sometimes she listened. Most times she didn't. It felt wrong to be happy, wrong to laugh, wrong to continue living when the person she loved most no longer could. Weeks became months, and months came 6 unbearable months of endless, suffocating darkness. Then one night, after crying herself to sleep for what felt like the 1,000th time, Taylor had a dream that would change everything. It felt different from every other dream she had experienced since Rose died. It felt real. In the dream, as she stood in a beautiful field filled with flowers stretching endlessly beneath a golden sky, the air felt warm against her skin. For the first time in months, she felt something she had almost forgotten: peace. Then she saw Rose standing only a few feet away, smiling, healthy, beautiful, exactly as she remembered her. Taylor immediately burst into tears and ran toward her. The moment she reached her sister, She threw her arms around her and held on tightly, terrified that letting go would make her disappear again. I miss you, Taylor cried, her voice cracking with the weight of a half-year of unspoken sorrow. Rose held her gently, stroking her hair. I know, Taylor, I'm trying to watch over you, but I can't do this if you won't let me. No, I can't do this without you. Taylor shook her head violently. I can't go on. Rose pulled back slightly and looked directly into her eyes with deep intensity. Taylor, you've stopped living. You've stopped chasing your dreams. You've stopped being yourself. You don't honor me by destroying yourself. You honor me by living the life we always talked about. The dream slowly began fading, the vibrant flowers blurring into mist as Rose smiled one last time, whispering, I love you, little sister. Taylor woke up gasping, her face drenched in fresh tears, but something deep inside her frozen chest had finally cracked. The pain was still there, the loss remained a devastating weight. But for the first time in 6 months, there was also a tiny flicker of hope. The following week, she finally agreed to see a therapist specializing in severe grief. The sessions were agonizing, ending alternately in heavy silence or violent weeping. But little by little, she began confronting the immense sorrow she had spent months running from. During a particularly emotional breakthrough, the therapist looked at her warmly and made a suggestion that would alter the course of her destiny. You and your sister were exceptionally close, she said gently. You talked every day. So, maybe you shouldn't stop talking to her. You can write letters, or perhaps leave voice notes on her number. It can help your brain process the finality of the loss, while maintaining a healthy emotional connection to the bond you shared. That very evening, Taylor sat alone in her dark living room, her hand shaking as her thumb hovered over Rose's old contact profile. With a breath that felt like tearing silk, she pressed the microphone icon and began to record. Hi, Rose, she whispered, a sob instantly catching in her throat. I don't really know how to do this, but I went outside today. I saw the sun. I think you would have been proud of me. When she hit send, the crushing weight on her chest loosened just a fraction. She didn't know it yet, but that simple voice note would become her daily lifeline, and the first step toward a terrifying, unimaginable future. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the industrial skyline of Manchester, a completely different reality existed. This was the world of Henshaw Kendrick, a 28-year-old billionaire who had built a massive real estate and investment empire from absolute nothingness. Henshaw was a man defined by control, calculating precision, and an emotional detachment that made him legendary in the corporate world. Born into extreme poverty, and having lost his own parents to a harsh twist of fate at a young age, Henshaw had learned early on that the world did not tolerate weakness. He had clawed his way to the top of the social ladder, surrounding himself with extreme wealth, pristine glass offices, and superficial acquaintances who only valued him for his net worth. To the public, he was an untouchable, ruthless tycoon who ruthlessly acquired competitor companies and showed zero vulnerability. But inside his massive echoing penthouse, surrounded by expensive art and cold marble, Hen was profoundly lonely. He had everything money could buy, yet he possessed absolutely nothing that was real. His life was a flawless, frozen machine, entirely devoid of genuine human connection. The collision of their two completely separate worlds began with a simple technological oversight. Weeks prior, Henshaw had lost his primary phone during a high-stakes business trip in London. Because his old number had been compromised and targeted by corporate hackers trying to access his private financial networks, his elite security team advised him to completely abandon the line and request an entirely new, highly secure, unlisted number from the elite telecommunications registry. The company processed the request instantly, randomly assigning him a recycled premium number that had recently been returned to the database after going completely inactive for 6 months. Neither the telecom company nor Henshaw had any way of knowing that this exact number had previously belonged to a young doctor named Rose Kennedy, the very number that her grieving little sister was about to start calling every single day. The first voicemail arrived on a quiet Wednesday afternoon while Henshaw was working inside his private pottery studio, a secret hobby he used to escape the brutal pressures of his corporate empire. His hands were covered in wet clay as he meticulously shaped a decorative vase, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Suddenly his phone vibrated against the wooden table. Assuming it was an urgent notification from his chief financial officer regarding a multi-million-dollar acquisition, He wiped his hands and pressed play on the unknown audio file. Instead of a business briefing, a soft, trembling female voice filled the silent, pristine room. Hi, Rose. I tried making that pasta recipe you used to love today, and somehow I managed to burn the water. Don't ask me how, because I honestly don't know. I miss you so much. I wish you were here to laugh at me. Henshaw froze, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He stared at the screen. It was clearly a wrong number, a misplaced message meant for a deceased or absent relative. He initially prepared to block the contact or send a cold, automated text stating that the number had been reassigned to a new owner. But as he looked at the audio timeline, something about the raw, unfiltered vulnerability in the girl's voice stopped his hand. He deleted the thought and went back to his work, assuming she would eventually realize her mistake. But she didn't. The next day, another notification chimed. Hi, Rose. I finally reopened the beauty studio today. It felt so strange walking back inside without you calling me to wish me luck, but I did it. I didn't cry until I got back to the car. Day after day, week after week, the messages kept coming. Taylor treated the empty phone number as a sacred confessional, sharing her deepest fears, her small victories, her lingering tears, and the gradual rebuilding of her shattered life. And on the other end, the ruthless billionaire found himself completely paralyzed by her honesty. He learned that her name was Taylor, that she loved cinnamon pastries, that she was terrified of failure but desperately wanted to make her late sister proud. For a man who spent his entire life surrounded by corporate sharks, fake smiles, and people wanting to exploit his wealth, Taylor's voice became a pure, untainted sanctuary. He began to crave the messages, stopping vital board meetings the moment his phone vibrated just to put on his headphones and listen to this unknown girl share her soul. He was a billionaire with the world at his feet, yet he was secretly becoming emotionally dependent on the private grief of a struggling orphan in London. He knew it was an invasion of privacy and dangerous obsession and a lie by omission that grew heavier with every passing day, but he couldn't stop. He was falling desperately in love with the voice, completely unaware that his secrecy was laying the groundwork for an absolute catastrophe. As the months passed, Henshaw's obsession deepened into a desperate need to see the woman behind the voice. The opportunity finally presented itself during a late-night voicemail, where Taylor, her voice soft and reflective, mentioned she was finally brave enough to attend a public grief support picnic in a London park that coming Saturday. She even playfully mused about wearing a light blue dress and white sandals, because Rose had always loved that outfit. Hearing this, something shifted inside Henshaw's calculating mind. The distance between Manchester and London suddenly felt like nothing. He ordered his private driver, cancelled a weekend of massive real estate mergers, and left for the capital with his heart pounding in a way he hadn't experienced since childhood. When Saturday arrived, he stood at the edge of the crowded park, a wealthy predator hidden among the ordinary citizens, his eyes scanning the crowd with intense focus. And then he saw her. Taylor was standing beneath a large oak tree, wearing the exact light blue dress she had described, her wavy hair blowing gently in the autumn breeze. She was beautiful, but it was the radiant, resilient warmth emanating from her that completely captured him. He watched from afar as she stood up in front of the support group, tears shining in her eyes as she spoke eloquently about her sister's sacrifice and her own journey toward healing. Hearing her words live, seeing the physical reality of the woman he had listened to in secret for months, Henshaw knew there was no turning back. He had crossed a line, and instead of stepping back to reveal the truth, his possessive, enamored heart decided to execute a flawless plan to enter her life under a complete fabrication, utterly blind to the fact that this profound deception would soon become the terrifying beginning of her ultimate doom. Narrator. The step Henshaw took out of the shadows and onto the manicured grass of that London park was the exact moment the trap snapped shut, though Taylor had absolutely no idea she was the prey. He approached her just as the grief support gathering began to disperse, putting on the performance of a lifetime, his intense, dark eyes softened by a carefully practiced look of vulnerability. When he spoke, his voice was smooth, deep, and carried a comforting weight that immediately cut through the background noise of the city. He introduced himself simply as Henshaw, omitting his famous surname, his billionaire status, and the monstrous truth that he had spent the last several months eavesdropping on her most intimate breakdowns. He claimed he was just a man visiting London who had lost his parents years ago, a man who happened to be walking by and was deeply moved by the words she shared about her sister Rose. To Taylor, who had spent 6 months surrounded by people who walked on eggshells around her grief, Henshaw's directness felt like a breath of fresh air. She looked into his eyes and felt an immediate, inexplicable wave of safety, completely unaware that the comfort she felt was because this man already knew every single trigger, preference, and hidden wound inside her heart. He knew she loved cinnamon pastries, so within an hour he had guided her to a small artisanal bakery tucked away from the main streets. He knew she grew emotional when looking at certain styles of art, so he steered their conversation toward the exact philosophical topics that would make her feel deeply understood. The manipulation was seamless, flawless, and terrifyingly effective. To a young woman still rebuilding her life from the ashes, Henshaw appeared to be a miraculous soulmate dropped into her world by destiny itself. Their first 4-hour conversation in the park melted into evening, and by the time they exchanged phone numbers, Taylor felt a spark of hope she thought had died forever in the wreckage of her sister's car. But back in Manchester, the reality of Henshaw's life was a stark, menacing contrast to the gentle, grieving orphan he pretended to be. Inside the towering, glass and steel headquarters of Kendrick Holdings, Henshaw returned to his role as a ruthless corporate dictator. He was a billionaire whose massive wealth was built on total control, a man who destroyed business competitors without a single shred of remorse. His best friend and chief legal counsel, Marcus, watched the transformation with growing alarm. Standing in Henshaw's pristine, minimalist office, Marcus threw a file onto the mahogany desk and looked at his billionaire friend with absolute disbelief. "You've lost your mind, Henshaw," Marcus said, his voice echoing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You are a billionaire with a target on your back. You've been tracking a civilian woman across the country because of a recycled phone number? You know everything about her, and she knows absolutely nothing about you. This isn't a romance, it's a liability. What happens when she finds out you've been hoarding her dead sister's voicemails? It's like a piece of stolen corporate data." Henshaw didn't even look up from his tablet, his face hardening into an expression of cold arrogance. "She won't find out," Henshaw replied, his tone chillingly calm. "I am giving her everything she needs to heal. I am the only one who truly understands her. What she doesn't know cannot hurt her." As the weeks rolled on, the emotional contrast between the two characters grew into a dangerous, towering wave. Taylor was pouring her genuine, fragile heart into this new relationship, believing she was finally experiencing a beautiful, pure chapter of healing. She restarted her skincare formulation business with a newfound passion, her creativity sparked by the love she believed she had found. Meanwhile, Henshaw was running a dual operation. Every single evening, after spending hours on the phone with Taylor pretending to be an ordinary businessman, he would log into the secret phone containing Rose's old number. He would sit in the dark, pouring a glass of expensive scotch, and press play on the new voice notes. Taylor continued to leave for her dead sister. He listened to her confessing her growing feelings for him. He listened to her tell Rose how safe Henshaw made her feel. He used her dead sister's ghost as a cheat code, a direct blueprint to navigate her emotions, ensuring he never made a single mistake, never had a disagreement, and always bought the exact flowers that would bring tears of joy to her eyes. It was a staggering act of psychological trespass, a supreme injustice where a powerful, wealthy elite was treating the sacred grief of a vulnerable girl as his own private game of emotional conquest. The true test of Taylor's loyalty and kindness arrived 5 months into their relationship, when Henshaw invited her to his private estate in Manchester for a long weekend. He showered her with extreme luxury, buying her designer dresses, expensive jewelry, and arranging a breathtaking dinner on a private rooftop overlooking the city. Taylor felt like she was living in a fairy tale, completely overwhelmed by his generosity. That night, wrapped in a cloud of pure, unconditional love, Taylor stepped into the guest bedroom, while Henshaw took a business call on the balcony. Out of habit, her heart swelling with gratitude, she took out her phone to leave her daily update for Rose. "Hi, Rose," she whispered into the receiver, her eyes shining. "I think I'm in the healthiest relationship in the world. Henshaw is everything we ever dreamed of. I wish you were here to see how happy I am." She pressed send. And in that exact, horrifying second, the heavy silence of the bedroom was punctured by a sharp, familiar chime. The notification sound didn't come from her phone. It came from inside the room. Taylor froze, her breath catching in her throat as a cold dread flooded her veins. Her eyes slowly drifted toward the nightstand. She walked forward like a sleepwalker, her hand trembling violently as she pulled open the mahogany drawer. There, lying face up in the dark, was a sleek, unlisted smartphone. The screen was illuminated, and splashed across the display in bright, mocking text was a notification from her own number, displaying the exact audio file she had sent to her dead sister just 3 seconds ago. Her mind screamed in denial as her fingers frantically swiped the screen open. It wasn't locked. The interface displayed a massive archive of audio files, hundreds of them. She scrolled down, her eyes widening in pure horror as she saw dates stretching back 6 months. She saw the voice notes she recorded while sobbing under her blankets in the dead of winter. She saw the desperate, broken messages where she confessed her deepest childhood insecurities. She saw the notes where she talked about her parents' tragic deaths in Nigeria. Every single piece of her soul, every private tear she thought she was sending into the heavens to reach her sister, had been intercepted, collected, and listened to by the man downstairs. The realization hit her like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her chest. The perfect dates, the uncanny timing, the flowers, the deep understanding. It wasn't a soulmate. It was a calculated, high-tech ambush executed by a wealthy stranger who had used her ultimate tragedy to strip her of her emotional privacy. The bedroom door clicked open, and Henshaw walked in, a bright smile on his face that instantly withered into ash when he saw Taylor standing over the open drawer, holding the smoking gun of his massive deception. Tears of absolute betrayal streaming down her pale face. Narrator. The silence that followed the shattering of the plates on the floor was deafening, a thick, suffocating vacuum where Taylor's reality completely unraveled. She didn't stay to hear his pathetic excuses, his desperate pleas, or the hollow explanations of a billionaire who thought his wealth could buy forgiveness for a stolen soul. Within hours, she was on a flight back to London, the tears streaming down her face, blurring the city lights beneath her as she fled the golden cage Henshaw had built. When she arrived at her small apartment, she collapsed against the door, clutching her chest as a violent, familiar wave of grief, this time paired with a dirty, agonizing sense of violation, threatened to swallow her whole. She felt exposed, naked, and utterly foolish. The man she had let into her bed, the man she thought had healed her broken heart, was nothing more than a high-tech voyeur who had built a romance on the grave of her dead sister. But Henshaw wasn't a man who accepted defeat. Driven by a toxic mixture of genuine panic and the arrogant belief that he could control any outcome, he followed her to London. For 6 agonizing hours he stood outside her apartment door in the freezing rain, pounding against the wood, begging, pleading, and weaponizing his own tears until, out of pure exhaustion, Taylor finally turned the lock. The confrontation that followed inside her small living room was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Henshaw dropped to his knees, his expensive designer coat dragging on the floor as he wept openly, laying bare his entire life story. He told her about his own lonely childhood, the coldness of his billionaire existence, and how her raw, beautiful voice notes had been the only light in his dark, corporate world. He swore on his life that his love was real, that he didn't start listening out of malice, and that he only kept the secret because he was terrified of losing the only genuine connection he had ever found. Taylor, exhausted, emotionally depleted, and still deeply in love with the version of the man she thought he was, looked at his tear-stained face and made a fatal mistake. She believed him. She mistook his desperate obsession for a profound, destiny-driven devotion. They reconciled, but the dynamic had fundamentally shattered. Trust was gone, replaced by a dark, shifting power imbalance. Henshaw, terrified that she might slip away again, began using his vast wealth to entangle her completely, subtly moving from a romantic partner to an absolute controller under the guise of overwhelming generosity. The situation rapidly worsened as Henshaw's true, manipulative nature began to seep to the surface. He didn't just want to be her boyfriend anymore. He wanted to own every facet of her existence so she could never escape him. He secretly used a shell company to buy out the manufacturing facility that produced the ingredients for Taylor's growing skincare line, effectively holding her business dreams hostage without her knowledge. He hired private security teams to follow her around London under the pretext of keeping her safe, but in reality, they were tracking her every move, logging who she spoke to, where she went, and how long she spent away from her phone. Every time Taylor tried to express a desire for space or a boundary, Henshaw would instantly manipulate her emotions, looking at her with wounded eyes and saying, "After how hard I fought to keep you after my mistake, how can you doubt me?" I gave up my privacy, my pride, and stood in the rain for you. Everything I do is to protect us." He became a psychological phantom, always one step ahead, twisting her lingering guilt over the reconciliation into a weapon that kept her compliant and isolated from her aunt and her remaining friends. But the ultimate dark intrigue was brewing in the background, where a sinister shadow from Henshaw's corporate past was waiting to turn this fragile dynamic into absolute doom. While Henshaw was consumed with controlling Taylor, his chief legal counsel and former best friend, Marcus, was secretly plotting a devastating betrayal. Marcus had watched Henshaw become completely distracted by his obsession with this ordinary girl, neglecting board meetings and leaving massive multi-million-dollar accounts unmonitored. Marcus wasn't just alarmed, he was greedy. Working behind closed doors with Henshaw's fiercest corporate rivals, Marcus had managed to install spyware on Henshaw's personal devices, including the secret smartphone that held every single one of Taylor's private voicemails to Rose. Marcus didn't see a tragic love story. He saw an absolute goldmine of blackmail material. He compiled a massive digital dossier of Taylor's deepest secrets, her financial vulnerabilities, her emotional traumas, and the exact details of how Henshaw had deceived her. Marcus watched from the shadows, his face twisted into a smug, villainous sneer, as he prepared to release this information to the public and the regulatory boards, a move that would completely destroy Taylor's business reputation. Brand her as a manipulative fraud who used her sister's death for social climbing and legally bankrupt her before she could ever uncover the truth. The tension was building to a screaming pitch, a dark storm closing in on an innocent woman who thought she had survived the worst, while the true villain celebrated a victory that would bring her to her absolute knees. Narrator. The storm that had been brewing in the dark corporate underbelly of Manchester finally broke on a cold Tuesday morning, and its primary target was not the billionaire who had orchestrated the lie, but the innocent woman who had survived its fallout. It happened during the high-profile launch gala for Taylor's newly expanded international skincare brand, held in a magnificent glass pavilion in central London. Taylor stood in the center of the room, looking breathtaking in an elegant gown, surrounded by investors, high society journalists, and influencers who were praising her as the next big breakthrough entrepreneur. Henshaw stood by her side, smiling with possessive pride, believing he had successfully woven his wealth around her life tightly enough to keep her forever. But just as Taylor stepped onto the stage to deliver her keynote speech, the giant digital screens behind her flickered, hissed, and died. The celebratory branding vanished, replaced by an ominous flashing interface. Before anyone could draw a breath, a booming, distorted audio file began to blast through the state-of-the-art sound system. It was Taylor's voice. It was her broken, weeping voice from a year ago, pouring out her soul, screaming through her grief into her dead sister's voicemail. The room plunged into a horrified, breathless shock. Hundreds of high-profile guests froze, champagne glasses hovering mid-air, as Taylor's most private, agonizing moments of trauma were broadcasted to the elite of the city. But the horror didn't stop there. The audio cut sharply to a hidden recording of Marcus, his voice dripping with venom, laying bare the entire conspiracy. The screens flashed open with legal documents, text messages, and internal memos revealing that Henshaw's shell companies had secretly bought out Taylor's manufacturers to control her, and that Marcus had leaked these private recordings to the press to brand her a fraud. The revelation was a calculated, devastating public execution of her dignity. The crowd erupted into a feeding frenzy of whispers, gasps, and flashing camera lights. Taylor stood on the stage, the bright spotlight blinding her, looking down at the very people who had just been applauding her, now staring at her with pity and disgust. Her chest heaved, her breathing shattered, and the walls of the pavilion seemed to close in on her as she realized her entire life, her healing, and her sacred memory of Rose had been turned into a disgusting corporate circus. Henshaw rushed toward the stage, his face pale with a terror he had never felt in his entire life, but he was intercepted. Marcus stepped out from the crowd, flanked by corporate lawyers and a security team, a look of absolute triumph and arrogant malice plastered across his face. Marcus laughed out loud, a sound that echoed over the murmurs of the panicked crowd. "Did you really think your little fairy tale would last, Henshaw?" Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You got weak. You got distracted by a penniless orphan. While you were playing the grieving lover, I took over the board. The investors are pulling out of her company, The media already has stories that she traded her dead sister's phone to climb into bed with a billionaire, and by tomorrow morning, her brand will be completely bankrupt and erased from the market. You lose everything, Henshaw, and she loses her dignity. Marcus turned toward Taylor, his eyes gleaming with a sickening superiority. You should have stayed in bed, little girl. You don't belong in our world. You're just a tool we used to break a billionaire. But the villain's celebration was cut short by a sound that silenced the entire pavilion. It was a loud, sharp laugh. It didn't come from Henshaw, it came from Taylor. Slowly she stepped down from the stage, her tears completely dry, her posture straight, and her eyes burning with an intense, unyielding fire. She didn't look broken. She looked dangerous. She pulled her phone from her clutch and tapped the screen. Suddenly, the giant digital displays changed again. The malicious leaked documents vanished, replaced by a live, high-definition video feed of a major federal financial crimes unit entering Kendrick Holdings' main headquarters in Manchester. Marcus's face drained of color instantly. The smug sneer vanished from his lips, replaced by a look of sudden, paralyzing panic. Taylor walked directly up to him, her white sandals clicking firmly against the marble floor until she was standing mere inches away from his trembling frame. "You think you're the only one who knows how to play a game, Marcus?" Taylor said, her voice echoing with a terrifying, absolute authority through the microphone. "I have no idea how this man knew who I was back then, but I knew he was going to pay for it for not telling me who he was before getting into my life. He was going to pay for everything he did to me, and you were going to be the weapon I used to do it." She stepped closer, her gaze cutting through Marcus like a blade. "Did you really think I didn't notice the spyware you put on Henshaw's phone 3 months ago? I let you download those voicemails. I let you think you were winning. Because while you were busy stealing my personal grief to blackmail us, I used your access to route every single one of your illegal offshore transactions, your corporate espionage files, and your insider trading logs directly to the federal authorities. The launch tonight wasn't for my skincare line, Marcus. It was an international sting operation, and you just broadcasted your own confession to the entire world. The humiliation of the antagonist was absolute and devastating. Right there, in front of the entire high society crowd, the flashing cameras of the paparazzi, and the investors he had tried to steal, Marcus began to shake violently. He dropped his expensive leather briefcase, the papers scattering across the floor as he stumbled backward, trying to find words to justify himself, to apologize, to plead, but his throat was completely dry. 2 federal agents stepped out from the shadows of the pavilion, handcuffs gleaming under the gala lights. They grabbed Marcus by his arms, forcing him to his knees as he wept and begged for mercy, his dignity stripped away completely in a matter of seconds. The very man who had tried to cast an innocent woman into social exile was now being dragged out of the building in chains, completely ruined, deeply humiliated, and utterly exposed as a pathetic thief. It was a complete, roaring triumph of absolute justice, leaving the crowd in a stunned, breathless silence as Taylor stood tall, the ultimate victor of a game they never expected her to play. Narrator. The ashes of that explosive night settled quickly, leaving behind a completely rewritten destiny for everyone involved. For Marcus, the harsh hand of karma struck with absolute unyielding force. He didn't just lose his position at the company, he lost his freedom, his reputation, and every single penny he had stolen through his corrupt schemes. The courts sentenced him to a lengthy term in a maximum security prison, and his assets were seized to pay off the massive regulatory fines resulting from his insider trading. He went from drinking champagne in elite penthouses to sitting in a cold gray cell, a broken man completely erased from the high society he had tried so ruthlessly to dominate. Henshaw, too, faced his own profound reckoning. Though he avoided legal ruin, the exposure of his initial deception forced him to step back completely from his corporate throne. He realized that his wealth had become a cage, blinding him to the true meaning of human connection. He legally transferred a massive portion of his real estate portfolio into a charitable foundation dedicated to supporting orphans and struggling entrepreneurs, choosing a life of quiet humility, patient accountability, and genuine support for the woman who had saved him from his own cold emptiness. For Taylor Kennedy, the path of resilience turned her ultimate pain into an extraordinary empire of empowerment. Her skincare brand did not crumble. Instead, the public's immense respect for her strength and brilliance catapulted her business into an international phenomenon. She used her global platform to open formulation studios across the UK and back home in Nigeria, giving thousands of young women the opportunities that her sister Rose had fought so hard to provide for her. But the greatest victory was the peace she finally found within her own heart. One crisp autumn morning, a month before she and a deeply reformed, genuinely devoted Henshaw were wed in a quiet, intimate ceremony, Taylor stood before Rose's polished headstone. The cemetery was completely serene, golden leaves drifting lazily through the air as she squeezed Henshaw's hand, looking toward the sky with a radiant, tearful smile. She didn't leave a voice note this time. She spoke directly to the wind, introducing the man she loved to the sister who had practically raised her. She finally understood that love never truly leaves the world. It simply changes shape, guiding us through the dark until we find exactly where we belong. This breathtaking story serves as a profound, unyielding lesson for us all. It reminds us that no matter how deep the darkness of grief or betrayal might seem, you must never close your heart to the unpredictable ways the universe handles justice. Karma is not a myth. It is an absolute, inevitable force that reconstructs the broken and completely dismantles the arrogant. True strength lies in remaining fiercely loyal to your integrity, even when surrounded by a world of deception. Open yourself up to the unexpected packages life delivers, because sometimes our deepest wounds are exactly what lead us to our greatest triumphs and the love we always deserved. My amazing Shan story lovers, what do you think about Taylor's incredible journey of justice and healing? How do you feel about the way karma completely handled Marcus in the end? Please let me know your thoughts and your own life experiences in the comments section below. If this emotional and intriguing story touched your heart, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs inspiration today, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, dramatic life stories that prove truth will always prevail. Thank you so much for watching, take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.